Have you figured out what it is that resonates with everybody? Because something's working, and I'm sure you've toyed around with some of the formats, right?
With the podcast, I think the recognizability of like people like you said, like you love like scrolling through and like
Yeah.
I'll admit I do think it looks like impressive if it's like a out of nowhere, like, hey, this exists. You're like, whoa, what is this? And you're just seeing all the
Yeah.
names and it's clicking. I think there's definitely that appeal. I think people love to relive the past, retro or whatever. Nostalgia is an in thing. So I think whether we're talking about like the clothes that you used to wear or the shows that we used to watch or the sports or the news events or just the minor things of something that happened in blank class or whatever, I think that sort of thing is appealing whether you lived it or you were just one of those kind of those stereotypes or archetypes that we talk about, as far as being the cool kid or the nerd or the athletic kid or the quiet one or I think people react and go, oh man, that was kind of like my college or my high school time, or that's what it was like for me growing up.
It was so binary back then. Like you were either the cool kid or you weren't, right? And when you would watch TV as a kid, like that was all there was, right? Whereas now, I don't know, I watch some of the shows on Netflix,
Yeah.
and the kids are so woke that there's like a segment, there's a niche for everyone. Like honestly, it seems like it's a much cooler place to be than when we were like teenagers.
That was the reason why, I think first and foremost, I didn't want this to be necessarily a thing about me. This is why I thought this was the way to do it, was to talk more to people that I never really had those conversations with, because I think we're so far removed and we're in a time now where so many things that we used to think don't exist anymore. Just going back to like very early when I talked to Alea Bradshaw, and so much of what we were talking about as far as like just trauma and the things that our parents go through and how that affects how that treats us. And we maybe back then didn't know because our parents weren't into really, for everyone at least, weren't into talking about their feelings or making sure that you don't go down certain paths that they went through. They were just more reactionary of don't do this, or even worse type of reactions to the way you did things without exactly knowing why they were such a hard ass. And so many, people have talked about just that type of relationship. Your cousin, Brian Cho, talked about like his parents were like strict and having this mahjong addiction where kids would come over and that's where his friends would come from, would be from their group of friends. And like he never really got to like the bottom, and like this pressure of going to MIT, he never really got to the bottom of so much of like why his parents were like that. He can guess and from where they came from and what they wanted for him and all that, but he never really had those, and he still has kind of like those fears of himself not being adequate.
Yeah, man, maybe you're just like you're like the psychologist that we never had on all our deep rooted unresolved issues.
But also, to be fair, a lot of times people are psychiatrists for me as well. Like I get many a tip on like, dude, you need to chill out. Don't let that bother you so much, So it comes 50-50, I think.
Nice. Yes, I guess how do you typically do this? How do you want to?
We're doing it already. So I would say like, so let's talk about you a little bit. When did you come into Wissahickon?
So I moved from Upper Merion. So I came to the district right as the start of at the start of our freshman year.
Okay.
So I was like the new kid. I remember being really intimidating on the first day. You're, I think, 13, 14-year-old kid.
Yeah. And,
the lunch, I remember just the cafeteria being a really rowdy place and I didn't know anybody. So, and then went to Penn State after high school, and a lot of things happened. And I live in Singapore now. So,
wow.
Yeah, but I think I was my profile in high school. So I was in I was an okay student.
Yeah.
I played football. I was average at a lot of things. I remember I got cut from the.
It was in ninth grade that you started.
Yeah, in ninth grade. Brian was my cousin, so I had a little bit of, I knew some people.
Yeah. How did you move? What was the reason that you moved actually from Upper Merion to Wissahickon?
So my mom took a job in the region. So I had moved from like New Jersey, and obviously my mom was part of that like mahjong club. So even when I was living in New Jersey, my mom would drive to Brian's house every Friday, so we'd spend the weekend.
Oh,
In Philly.
wow.
Yeah, and the irony of it is that I when we were kids living in New Jersey, I'd see Brian almost every other weekend, and then when I moved to Wissahickon for high school, I barely ran into him. Right?
Yeah, it spoiled it.
Yeah, it was really weird. We didn't have any classes together. We didn't have any friend groups that mixed or anything. Javier Marquis was probably my best friend in high school. We used to hang out all the time. When I was a freshman early on, I used to hang out a lot with like Evan Wallace.
Yeah.
Evan was the first person that ever got me drunk. I think we must have been like 15 years old or something, and he walked me through how to drink vodka. He was like he's like, yeah, here's, have some water, alternate. It's gonna hit you soon. You don't feel anything now. It tastes awful. Just go with it, right? Yeah, and I remember hearing about what happened to Evan a couple years ago, and I think I was the last person to find out. That was pretty crazy. Yeah, when I was friends with Bethany Smith towards like senior year, and then I was friends with her at Penn State our freshman year. Obviously, when that happened. Let's see, who else was in my friend group? And then like Brandon and Susie those were real close to them. But again, yeah, like once you go your separate ways, it's tough to kind of keep in track with everybody. So yeah.
Did you, when you were before you got to Wissahickon, were you like a popular kid, like in your middle school in Upper Merion and elementary school? Were you like a popular kid? Were you like, I often talk about like the group of the Asian kids that I always felt were segregated from the rest of us, and I kind of felt a lot of races mainly, and football being one of the integrators, I think, actually, of race, that like where people got much more of a mix of friends. But I always felt like throughout, did that exist like in Upper Merion, where you'd have like just the group of the Asian kids, quote unquote, that did not mix when you would look in the halls?
So that was actually a shock for me going to Wissahickon. So I was actually always the only Asian kid in the entire school, right? So New Jersey, like Upper Merion, I was the only Asian kid, right? So I think it was a bit of a shock when I came to Upper Merion, and like there was a group of Korean kids and like Aram Lee and those guys. So that was quite interesting to me. But by that time, I'd already grown up and just kind of used to it. So and I think my parents did a pretty good job of like assimilating pretty well. So I played football and basketball and stuff. So I think that was a key too. So sports obviously helped me blend in a little bit more. Yeah. And it was quite interesting. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Crazy Rich Asians.
I haven't seen it on Netflix, right?
I don't know if it's on Netflix or not. Yeah, I think it is. But but it came out a couple of years ago, and I remember watching it, and I must have been like 35 at the time. But I remember watching it and thinking like that was actually the first time in my entire life that I'd ever seen like an Asian male on TV. And he was just like a normal dude who was like, who was like a strong male role model. I'd grown up and I'd never seen that ever, right? And you just think about the stuff you'd see on TV and stuff.
Yeah.
So I remember just being really just amazed by that, right? And if you think about just being a Black American as a kid, right, the kind of stuff that you'd see on TV now versus like the kind of content that's on now, it's like day and night, right? So you don't really, you kind of have to find that path yourself. Whereas I think now they probably have more defined niches, but at least you get a chance to sort of see what it can look like, right? So I think for us, a lot of where we came from is having to find that out on our own.
That's interesting. Were your parents immigrants?
Yeah. So they immigrated from Taiwan when they were like 19, 20. So they were pretty assimilated. So yeah.
Did that change? No, so like I think Rachel Kim talked about like pressure from her parents to like wanting to, I guess, blend in more, not blend in, or I guess like more segregate or stay involved more with like the Asian kids in school. That was not her preference. You dated, you know, American Boy and all that. Did you find once you got to Wissahickon, and you're used to being the only Asian kid in your school, and then you get to Wissahickon, was there pressure to, I don't know, I guess go more in that direction or find friends from that group, or were you?
Yeah, it was funny, right? So I think I remember trying to hang out with like the Korean, and I was too white for the Asian kids, and I was like too Asian for the white kids, right? So I was always kind of stuck in the middle there. So yeah, that was my experience.
I often, being biracial, right? I often felt like I wasn't like black enough to hang in the group of black kids, like in the cafeteria, and and all the black kids would say I was too white, or and then
I
all the
didn't even
white
know
kids,
that.
or the white kids would say like I didn't even know you were black. You know, that's like the type of shit that I would hear in high school.
Man, I didn't even, I'm so sorry. I didn't even know that.
What, that
It's
I was
funny, right? It's
biracial?
like, yeah, I didn't even know you're biracial, right? You know, it's like you have all these common identities, like, and just we never knew, right? It's funny, like there's a lot of things that I would actually go back to like my 18-year-old self and say, or my 16-year-old self and say that, you know, it took you 5, 10 years to figure it out, right?
Did you play other sports besides football?
Football and basketball.
Football and
Yeah.
basketball.
Yeah. So I remember being pretty good when I was a kid, and then you get to high school, and then all of a sudden, like, you're playing against the Earl Stouts and Steve Johnsons, and then you realize, yeah, you know, this isn't gonna work out. Where are those guys? Wait, where are those guys, by the way?
I have not heard or seen Steve in a very long time. And I think Earl is in like the Ambler area still.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like the George Cortezes and like those guys, like yeah, I didn't stand a chance.
That's I never, I was always way too intimidated to like get involved in because I would look from afar and just go, like, I would see then go, no fucking way. But you actually like went forward and at least like you went and tried out and made the team.
Yeah, freshman year we did okay. Sophomore year, that's when I started getting stuck on the bench, and then by junior year, I was just like, that was it.
Passed you by.
I remember coming home, and you know, I'd grown up my life playing basketball. And I remember coming home and like crying for like 2 days.
Because you didn't make it.
Yeah, and I look back now, and I was just like, really? But you're a 16-year-old kid, and like that's your entire world, right? And I think the thing I would go back on your teenage self is just like, listen, that world that you know now is like a fraction of like what your life's going to become.
Yeah, but you're right. It is everything, right? Like, again, I only know like TV shows like for reference for things like that since I didn't do it. But at least, you know, I did like musicals, and that would be the one thing I would do every year in the spring. And I know like in the winter, you'd have to audition, and I'd be like, fuck, all right, gotta know my parts, gotta have this down, gotta get better with my dancing.
Yeah, you know, and that's the other thing too. Like doing like musicals was not like a cool thing to do, right? But like now, like in college, I ended up like doing it. And like now, I watch Hamilton. I'm sitting there playing the soundtrack on a loop for like 3 weeks straight. I mean, it's like it's such a shame because like there's all these things that you're told that are not cool to do when you're a kid, and you just block it out, and you miss out on all these opportunities.
Yeah, it was always one of those things that like I did them since 8th grade, and I was always one of the few guys, or since 6th grade, sorry, and I was one of the guys in middle school. It's like maybe 2 guys, maybe 3 guys would be in the musical every year, and that, like you said, that would be the thing where guys would go, not musicals. And for me, that was like literally the only thing I could do. So I was like every year it was kind of like, all right, like I'm going to musical rehearsal, and I would go, and you're killing yourself, but like it wasn't anything I felt like I could like brag about.
Yeah, I remember being 17, and like Javier came into football practice one day, and he said, "Yeah, I'm quitting the team." I'm like, dude, what are you doing? What are you doing? No, you can't quit the team. He's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna do ballet instead," right? And so he quit the football team to do ballet, which at the time was crazy, right? But he ended up being one of the only guys in like ballet, right? He got a scholarship to, you know, to University of Arts doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So, but just you're such a dumb kid that like you only will do what is like the cool thing to do.
Did you look at
Yeah.
yourself as like a cool kid or anything like that? Did you think you fit into any of those notches, or did you just look at yourself as a dumbass?
I was a dumbass. We're all dumbasses. But I think it was fun. It was fun going off to college, and you eventually that's where you sort of find your niche and you understand a little bit about yourself. And then you go off into the real world. So.
Well, when you were growing up, what were you besides sports? Like, what were you actually into? What did you like to do? Like when you were in your free time or when you're with your friends, what kind of stuff were you playing? Or
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I think I think it's quite interesting. Like I think who I became as an adult was fairly evident when I was a teenager, right? Um, so my senior year of high school, I actually got in trouble because they found out I was cutting class. To it, I had actually enrolled at Montco.
yeah.
And I was taking computer science courses. And I think they found out and they kicked me out. They kicked me out of Montco. But I was always kind of like a weird kid. I was always kind of a hustler. I was always trying to think of a big thing. And it's, I ended up becoming like a tech startup kind of person. So I think it was, I think I didn't know it at the time, but a lot of the things that I was doing was very indicative of who I'd become as an adult.
So wait, you enrolled at Montco Community College.
Yeah,
While you were in high school to take classes on your own in computer science without anyone knowing.
Yeah, I got away with it. Even my parents didn't know. Yeah.
Why did you do that
for a bit? Because we didn't have. Yeah, it's just.
And whose idea was that? Who told you to do that?
So that's the interesting thing too, right? Because my parents at the time were divorced, right? So my grades took a huge dive in like my sophomore junior year when that happened. So I was kind of on my own, right? And I was always trying to like hustle and figure stuff out. So I had so I think the silver lining of my parents' divorce was that it helped, me figure out my path a little faster than normal. And I don't know, I always enjoyed building stuff. I don't know if you remember like those TI-83.
TI-83s, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if they still have those, but always loved like
they're still around
stuff on that.
Were you doing games or were you writing other types of other things?
Yeah, it was just writing games and stuff. And I wish I would have pursued it even heavier than I did back then. But yeah, there was always this desire to like build stuff. And so now my role is obviously the same thing. So turned it into a profession.
So who tells you though, like, hey, Jeff, there's these classes you can take, and if you just ditch out periods like 2 through 4, you can make it at Montco?
The same voice that tells you to do a podcast, right? It's a labor of love. It's a labor of you exploring what interests you, right?
That's wild.
Yeah.
Were you playing video games as a kid? Like is that what sparked? That's because Brian talked a lot about like having that interest and that part pushing him more into the tech world and going from like loving video games and wanting to know more about video games to wanting to know about how these things work behind that. Was that similar for you?
Dude, it was so unhealthy, man. I remember just like waking up and just like playing video games. And just like at 8 o'clock, it's fine. Over 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:30, and I'd be like, fuck it. I feel like I'm in school today. That was unhealthy, man. Yeah.
Wow. What video games were you playing?
Man, I used to play. What was it? Unreal Tournament.
I don't even know what that is. What is that
on the PC? Yeah, it was one of those first-person shooter games, and like NBA Live and stuff like that. And like, man, it was just so unhealthy, dude. Yeah, at least I figured out how to harness it from like playing it to trying to figure out how to like make it, right?
When you went to, I mean, a lot of times I would ask, like, did anyone help you harness this, or did you know what that meant from any like for a career perspective, or as you're going through high school, you're like, oh, I'm into video games. But I mean, you went to Montco, which is kind of, you thought of that, I guess you just wanted to do that. So that's kind of like half answers the question. But from the Wissahickon side, did you ever see anything that was like, oh, this is how I go about doing it, or here's something else maybe that I could do?
No, I think that's the really sad part. I had immigrant parents, so they obviously don't know how to navigate, your 20s. So you had to figure that out a lot on your own. And I look back now, and I mean, I don't know, I'm sure you've run into like parents that like, you know, they super successful. They know how to like manage their kids like paths and give them the freedom, but also like give them good advice.
Yeah. Been there, done
I didn't have
that.
any of that at all. Yeah, man. Like when I remember going off to college, like I only applied to like 2 schools, right? Because I didn't know you're supposed to apply to like tons of them. I didn't really study hard for that. Like just all these like things I didn't prepare well for. Yeah, yeah, right. Didn't take the right major in college, all this stuff. But you know, eventually you figure it out. You make up for lost time. So,
Did you have brothers or sisters?
I had a little sister, but she was like 8 years younger than me. So she actually went to a different school, and she went to go live with my mom.
So you were kind of blazing the path of figuring it out for the first time, like navigating the American education system.
Yeah, it's the immigrant experience. Plus, so it's okay. I had Evan Wallace and Javier Marquis to help me navigate my adulthood.
Yeah,
it's a phenomenal thing because I remember hanging out with Javier, and I remember like Nicole Marquis, and
yeah.
If you would have told me at that point that Nicole Marquis would have done like what she did, there is zero way. There is like if Jess Davis is on this end of the spectrum, I was like, oh yeah, I could see that. Nicole Marquis was on the absolute opposite end of that spectrum. On like
those incredible. Well, those are the things that I amaze about. Just like, and it's funny you say that. Like you never could have guessed, and those are the things that I look and I go, you know, it's in certain people because I marvel. I go, we went to the same school. Like, how is she so? But like you said, right? Like, I think everyone's experience, whether someone can tell them what happens or not, you're still kind of learning on the go. And I think it's just the people with the guts to push forward and go, all right, I might mess up on my first restaurant, but that'll help me for my second or third or my you know, my franchise or.
Yeah, she was definitely a dreamer too. So that was Evan. I just didn't think that she'd be able to just pull it off and just. I'm so amazed actually at what
it's very impressive.
Yeah. Are they actually? I didn't see. I haven't really clicked through all the other ones. Have there been other like crazy stories that have come out of this?
Of like successes and stuff, or like business stuff?
Not even just successes, but just like things in which the outcome was completely unexpected from the information that we had at the time when we were teenagers.
Annetta Piatek, I don't know if you remember her. She like works for like the State Department, like getting refugees all over the world and like life-threatening, you know, going to refugee camps where rebels are taking over the area, and she's providing aid. Yeah.
Was there anything in her story about her high school when you were interviewing her that connected that dot?
Well, she was her parents. She came from Poland with her parents. They were political refugees. I think when she was very, very young, and that was always an interest of her. But she wasn't like she wasn't any type of academic superstar. She was like a B student, but she always wanted to do it. She didn't get accepted to any of her colleges that she applied to, but she still got into like a great school, and there was no job for her and she couldn't find anything out of college. So she took an internship and she worked that into a position that they created. And like, she just kind of kept grinding for, you know, 10 years or whatever, until she finally got into the system.
Good for her.
Yeah. You said you're in Singapore?
Yeah, I'm in Singapore now.
So you're the second international interview that I've done, hers being the first.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. So before Singapore, I was living in Myanmar. I don't know if you've read about that in the news. I was there for a couple of years. Myanmar was where like they had a military coup and they completely took over the government.
Okay.
So I built a company there, and then it disappeared overnight. Before that, I was living in Amsterdam, and then before that in London, and then I spent my 20s in New York. So
did you travel?
Yeah, all these.
Did you travel growing up? In
I didn't
as a kid.
I didn't. I didn't actually. Even you don't exactly. I look at the kids that go to school here, and they're in a school with like 100 nationalities. Honestly, even like as early as like 5 years ago, I probably couldn't even have pointed to Singapore on a map, right? Um, so I didn't have that at all growing up. But I think there was always that desire, right? But when I graduated from Penn State, I graduated a couple years early. I spent the time just kind of backpacking um, around the world, and I think that was what opened up my eyes. And yeah, it sparked that creative, juice. And then I spent my 20s. Do you know what a hostel is?
No. What or where? Oh, I
Do
know
you
what
know
a
what a
hostel
hostel
is.
is?
Yes.
Yes. So I spent my 20s actually building hostels around like the US and like Europe and Asia.
Wow.
Sold the company. Yeah, I sold the company. So, but it turned that love of like travel into like a career.
Wait, you said you
It was
sold the company, meaning you started this company?
Yeah, I started with like 6 rooms. So I was in New York City. I must have been like 22. There was like an old brownstone in Brooklyn. I had like $6,000 in cash. It was just enough for like the first month. Like built all the IKEA furniture myself. I had no idea what I was doing. I remember like crying myself to sleep. I totally get like the hardest part is like the 0 to 1, right? Like when you think about like your first 10 podcasts or like your first 20 video podcasts, it's hard because you don't see any traction, you don't see any progress, you don't get any positive feedback. Um, but yeah, stuck with it, and then over like 10 years, 12 years, it ended up going to 1,000 rooms and like 80 employees, and just grinded it out. Um, and I remember having to like clean the rooms myself. Just and the really cool story is that um, you know I was always frustrated with the software that I was using for the hotel, and then turned that into like a software company, and then that software company like scaled to 41 countries. That company ended up getting acquired. Then I
Like
went to go work for
hotels,
like I don't know if,
like hotel
yeah, like hotel
software?
software. Yeah, so I went from building hotels to building hotel software. Um, and then I don't know if have you ever heard of Booking.com?
Yes.
Yeah, so then I went from building hotel software as a startup to building hotel software for Booking.com, right? Um, and that was super cool. And then all of that experience, because I was grinding it out every single day and I knew like all the ins and outs. About a year ago, I got a call from, I can't say the name, but it's a space company based in Texas,
Sure.
um, owned by a certain person that you read a lot about news. But they actually reached out to me and they said, hey, like we have this certain problem that we need to fix. We need software to manage all of our reservations and logistics for our travel for our employees. They called me out, flew out there, and built like a system for the space company. It was pretty cool. But it was
Wow.
all that hard work. Yeah, it was all that hard work from like just kind of like what you're doing now. It's just like trying to figure out how things work and just accelerating it and trying to figure out how to do it differently.
Wow, but that's like wild. That's like, I mean, that's okay. I have so many questions. So what did you
Yeah,
actually go? So you went to Penn State. You said you only looked at 2 schools. Was that one of them?
Penn State and Drexel. Just I didn't know that you only back then. I only applied to schools where like I knew like one kid who happened to go to that school. Penn State was one. Yeah, Penn State was one that I got into, and
Did
I
you
actually got
go?
rejected. I actually got rejected from Penn State, right? And the only reason that I got into Penn State was because like my next door neighbor, I don't know, happened to have like a successful tech company, and I was interning at his startup, and he he did one of those like phone calls into the somebody in admissions, and they re-accepted me. So that was the huge inflection point on my life, because otherwise I don't know, I wouldn't have gone to my dream school at the time. Um, yeah,
What was your major? Because you said you
at Penn
selected the
State.
wrong major.
At Penn State, I did like entrepreneurship. I didn't really learn anything. I don't know if you look back on your university. I didn't learn a single thing, right? But I think it's cool. You meet a lot of the people that that have a big influence on your life, right? It's all like high school. But it was pretty cool because I graduated in 2.5 years because I took double the amount of classes.
Why?
And then used that. I don't know. That's just the way my mind worked, even as a kid, right? Yeah, and I was always like trying to figure out how to accelerate things and try to be a hustler, right? But then, yeah, use that extra time to kind of travel the world. So, yeah.
So I guess what kind of blows my mind is you were telling that story of your progression from what seems to be like construction to building,
Yeah, well, I was
building software.
I mean, look,
So
these hands were never meant to build anything. Look, no, when I say building hotels, I mean like building the business and like running it. So yeah, trust me, I never laid a single nail on the wall.
Okay, so so you took computer science classes at Monco. Where does your skill set get good enough to when you're building a business, but then you just start saying, I'm going to build software now for the hotel because I hate the software so much.
Yeah,
in
so
that
that's
gap,
the thing, right? I wish I would have taken like studied computer science or computer engineering when I was in university, but I didn't, right? But I learned how to run a company, and I learned how to build software the same way that you learned how to do podcasts. You start by actually just doing it, right? It's not like you went to podcasting school.
I
right?
actually kind of did a little bit.
Oh,
Yeah.
you did?
Sort of. Yeah. Everything I'm kind of doing now is like,
okay.
is a buildup of like everything that I've been doing since college, from even just like learning to kind of how to segment a certain amount of things in a certain amount of time, and even basic editing skills of audio and video. And it changes the utility changes from a camera to a whatever to now it's on a disc or whatever. But the general principle, once you get there and you're just controlling it, is the same. That's what I've kind of been best at. So
so I guess I was always really good at trying to like taking something and then just breaking it down into smaller steps and just going with it. But you can learn anything, right?
Bullshit,
Jeff.
There's
podcasting.
There's no master class.
Podcasting,
there's no master class in the like early 2000s.
Well, yeah, now there literally is a master class. But if you think about it, it's a progression on, it's a series of progressions on like trying different things, right? Like, you know, anybody can sit down and do a podcast now, right? But then you sort of but then once you do enough, you sort of get these data points on what works and what doesn't, right? So for example, like, have you figured out, I don't know, which views get your most hits?
Yes.
Or most views or whatever?
Yeah.
Right. So you start getting these feedbacks on what works and what doesn't, right? So you start sort of doing this testing, you start doubling down on what doesn't work. And then you start learning how to like run Instagram ads to like drive that growth. And you start talking with other podcasters, and you sort of just start this giant loop, and that just helps accelerate that, right? But you always just try to think about how you can do what you're doing better. And there's this continuous drive that pushes you every day, but you'll never get past that first, that 0 to 1 if you don't have that labor of love, right? Like, nobody told you to do this podcast.
Right.
Yeah,
it was just one of those things that I had to do, or else I would hate if someone else, it got to the point I'd hate if someone else came out with a podcast like this. I would go, shit, I was thinking about this for 2 years, and then someone else did it.
But nobody told you to do this, right? It was you, right? And eventually you're going to end up doing a lot of these things that you're going to end up learning a lot of things that nobody ever taught you how to do, right?
Well, I guess the intimidating thing is like the how, right? So are you saying that you're self-teaching yourself how to use these it's the technical how that is the hold up for me, right? So it's like, I would love to be better at animation and 3D and things like that, which there are programs for, but I've yet to, I guess, dedicate that time. Or now there's videos to truly like immerse yourself so you can do it. But how does someone like do you already have a little bit of that basis from Montgo? Were you always just tooling with it because you went from your TI-83 to, okay, now here's a new way to program stuff like on my calculator, but now I'm doing it on my PC, and you've just got that base knowledge and you keep plugging in and trial and error in that way? Is that like the technical how? Is that how you started, like because you had a little bit of it in high school?
it wasn't, it was never because of a class that I took. It was always just your own, just taking that plunge on that first step. You know, your first podcast is going to be awful, right? Your first program that you write is always going to be awful.
But how do you even know how to do that? I guess is like the literal technical how. Like, are you like, this is the program? Like, how do you even learn that?
You don't. You literally go forward and you fail, right? And honestly, it's, you know, I've built a lot of companies, and honestly, your chances of success are correlated directly with like how fast you can fail and how fast you can fail, and if you can build in that mechanism to just fail constantly, like it works, right? So if you think about podcasting, if you think about what you're doing right now, right? You're, let's say, allocating, I don't know, 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week for that. It's not a lot of time at all. It's not a big time commitment. You know, this could very easily be like one happy hour that you have with your friends, but instead you're doing it, you know, you're doing this.
It's more,
right?
it's definitely more, sadly, much more time than that. I wish, but I get your point.
That's okay. It's productive, right? And it compounds over time. And like, honestly, it's going to be really amazing seeing if you continue this, where it's going to be like in a year, in 2 years, right? You know, I don't know if you're familiar. In Singapore, there's a guy, I think his name, like, have you heard of like Nas Daily or Nash Daily or something?
No. That kind of sounds Nash Daily.
Nas Daily. Anyway, he was a content creator, and now he raised a $11 million Series A to create a school for content creators, right? But he started out just like doing small videos.
Yeah. Favorite class in high school?
Favorite class. I think they called it like social lab when we were seniors.
Is that Mr. Ferrantino?
Yeah, social lab. I think it was cool just because you took an internship or something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is that the class where you leave and go take classes at Monco for the afternoon? Right. So I think he was the one that caught me. He was like, "Hey, you know, you're not going to your internship, you know," and he should have failed me. He's like, "Listen, I'm pulling you out right now," and then they parked me at the middle school, and they made me go down to the middle school every day to, like, I don't know, to help one of the teachers or something. But yeah, that was true. He was the one that caught me. God bless. I hope he's still teaching or still alive. But he was I don't know. He knew seniors were there just to like buy their time. Damn, that's a great story.
Yeah. So he called me up and he's like, "Yeah, how's your internship going?" I was like, "Yeah, it's going great. I'm learning a lot." He's like, "Yeah, I just called them. They haven't seen you in months."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think he was. I don't know. Just his reaction was, I think he just deals with it all the time. So.
Yeah, kids, right? Dumbasses,
Yeah.
as I alluded to earlier.
Yeah, we were all dumbasses.
What was your intern?
Honestly, yeah.
What was your internship supposed to be?
It was with that tech startup in like Plymouth Meeting or something. It was my next door neighbor's tech startup, and that weird chance was it was the reason I got into Penn State.
Oh.
Yeah, it's about creating serendipity, right? You know, a lot of like what you do is creating serendipity. Like somewhere along the lines, like you're going to do a podcast, and then you're going to connect two dots, and then it's going to accelerate and lead to something else. But you know, I don't know. I call it creating serendipity, right? So every startup that I've ever had, every company I've ever had, there were a few moments where you meet someone, a conversation you connect the two dots, and you know, it leads to something else. So like I was in Singapore for a tech conference, and I had one of those little startup booths, and this guy came by and was really interested, and we kept in touch over the years, and he was the one that ended up, you know, buying my software company, right? So it's all these little bits and pieces and these little paths that cross that lead to something else.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you date in high school?
Who did I date? I dated Amy Taylor.
Yeah.
I remember I think she switched schools.
Yeah, I was gonna say I remember her from middle school, and I don't remember her much. I mean, I knew her because I knew her in middle school, but I can't remember her much in high school. I remember she left at some point.
Yeah. Who else? I dated Brianna McQuaid was actually my first girlfriend. I think we lasted for like a couple days, right?
Like locker girlfriend.
Yeah. Who else? Yeah, I didn't really have many girlfriends in a second. Yeah, I think I was still in my awkward phase when I was a teenager.
Yeah, I was definitely in that. And that's why I always ask that question, because when your friends are, like I didn't have friends that were dating, so it wasn't like a thing, but like, Javier had a girlfriend and I assume you hung out, being on the football team, you've got like friends that are like in pretty, in kind of in those
Dude, waters. Yeah, I think honestly, it's the scariest when you're a 15-year-old kid and you've got like acne and like even just talking to honestly, it is like the scariest thing you could possibly do. Kelly Martin. I think she was a year below us.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
What were you watching? Right. What were you watching growing up?
Saved by the Bell every single day. It's just honestly, you know what? I watch some of that stuff now, and it's so cringy.
It's bad.
Even stuff that came out recently, a couple years ago, stuff like Superbad.
Yeah.
Or like American Pie, like it did not age well, right? So even the kids, like, I don't know, a half generation ago grew up with even shittier role models, right? Yeah, maybe like Reid Hoffman for Masters of Scale does like this cool story and then he ties into things. Maybe like each podcast you could start with like a shitty role model that we had when we were kids. You know what had a really negative effect on me was like Zack Morris. Like it wasn't cool. Like it was cool to be a slacker. It was cool to like bully other kids. It was not cool to like, if you like band, do band. If you like robotics, do robotics. That actually was a really negative force on all these things. And like, that's my like story to relate to. Right.
But see, you did football, and you did like Zack would have never pushed himself to learn. Like Zack didn't have any side skills.
I would have. If I went to Bayside, I would have been the kid that would have been doing Zack's homework so he could stay on the football team, right? Like just.
But that's the thing. Zack didn't do football. Zack didn't have any like real skill. Anything that Zack was good at, they made up for that episode. It was just like, all of a sudden, after 4 years, Zack is really good at singing and he's in a band. And it's like, wait a minute. Like that's never been Zack didn't have interests. His interests were Kelly Kapowski and making money. That was about
it. Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah. Zack made fun of the band. I think the one thing Zack really did was Zack did track. Right. Zack did, there was an episode where Zack was on the track team. That's like the one.
We need to track down the original writers of Saved by the Bell and get them on the show and talk to them about all the psychological damage they did to millions of kids.
They fucked us all up
in the 90s. Our shortcomings in life are because of you.
What about movies? What movies were you into in high school? You mentioned like American Pie. Did you have a favorite movie from that era of the late 90s?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think what was coming out around that time? I think it was like American Beauty, American Pie.
Yeah. We were like, the Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer era.
Yeah.
All those movies were like 20-year-olds were playing teenagers.
Yeah. It just gave you such an unrealistic expectation of high school, right? Yeah. Even I think they still actually do that. I was watching Never Have I Ever. And I was looking up the IMDb's, and some of them are like 30 years old.
Well, see, that's how it used to be, and I felt like that was like when the Jennifer Love Hewitts and the Nev Campbells. It's like, okay, well, at least they're like 24. Because like Saved by the Bell and 90210, like those guys by the end were like 30.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah.
What about music? What kind of music were you into?
What did I listen to? Oh God, I think I just listened to whatever was considered cool at the time. I remember, I think 7th, 8th grade, it was like Green Day. What started coming on when we were in high school? I can't even think back that far.
I think like, for me, I was into like, Eminem was really big. The Marshall Mathers LP,
Yeah.
Dr.
Oh
Dre, The
man,
Chronic 2001.
that's right. I remember there's a kid. Who was that kid? Jens Pinter.
Yeah.
Jens. Whatever happened to him?
I think he's living in like in a forest commune out in California or something like
Yeah,
that.
he'd be a really fun because he was. He was cool because he was cool because he was like the one kid who, like, very clearly didn't care about what anybody else thought. Right.
Right, he had the cheetah hair. He
Yeah.
dyed his hair like a
Yeah.
leopard or a cheetah, right?
Yeah.
Before swimming meets.
Yeah, he was very clearly somebody who just knew who he was, like, from an early age. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Did you listen to music with Jens? Was that where you're going with that?
Yeah, I remember I used to sit with him at lunch every day in like sophomore year or something. Yeah, Eminem was big then.
Yeah, Eminem. I think like TLC, No Scrubs was real big.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny too because when you say some of these songs, like it actually takes me back to a specific moment.
Yeah.
In time, right? So like, I remember, TLC, No Scrubs, TLC, No Scrubs, and then I remember listening on a loop on the CD with Evan Wallace in his like blue. He had like a giant truck. There was another one like No Pigeons.
Yeah, No Pigeons, Sporty Thieves.
Yeah, but it takes me back to that specific moment when I was 16. I'm listening to that song on a loop, and like that was how.
A pigeon is a girl who thinks she's fly and is also known as a
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, every song you can. What was it, like No Diggity or something?
Yeah, No Diggity. Yeah, Blackstreet.
Yeah. All these songs come back to a very specific moment in time.
Yeah,
it's funny.
So you get into Penn State kind of by this stroke of luck, and you said it was entrepreneurship. That was your major.
Yeah, it was one of those. It was kind of like social lab where you kind of just create your own major.
What was
it wasn't. You just cobble together. You just cobble together the easiest classes, and then I was optimizing for how to graduate in the shortest amount of time possible.
Okay, all right. Which you ended up doing 2.5 years. So, what was what was that like then moving to Happy Valley, right? I mean, you mentioned that your parents had gotten divorced. So were you living like with your with just one parent, or were you going in between houses, or?
Yeah, I was living with one parent. I think by that time I was already pretty independent. So I think I thrived in. I think I thrived in college, right? It was a great environment. You sort of meet all these people. You realize that the world exists beyond Wissahickon High School and the 200 kids that lived in your neighborhood. It was a great experience for me. And then obviously it just accelerated from there. So, yeah.
You mentioned Bethany and that you were friends with her, and of course you both went to Penn State. Can you talk about, like, I don't know, and you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but we're so young. One of the big parts of this show is I've talked a lot about Ray, and Ray dying senior year, and that being my best friend, and just one of the hardest things. Pam Lacey, who was really good friends with Ray when he passed, and we're just kind of like dumb young kids who don't know how to handle our emotions. And it certainly affected me that I don't think I realized until years later, like, oh, wow, it was probably like kind of compensating for that loss at being 17, 18 years old, losing a friend. You're dealing with it, just months later at Penn State. Can you talk a little bit about that if you want to?
Yeah, I remember. So I remember a couple things from that. So I remember Bethany was living on like the other side of the campus where like the older kids, like there was a freshman dorm. So I remember that having an effect. And then I also remember that I also remember distinctly that she kept hanging out with a certain crowd from our high school, which, I don't know why, right? I don't know. She was just someone that had the whole future. I mean, she was beautiful. She was smart. She had a whole future ahead of her. And for some odd reason, like she stayed attached to this weird crowd from our high school. A couple kids that were older than us. You know, yeah, I don't know. In a different universe, you know, things happen differently, and you know, she's, I don't know, who knows what she would have been up to. But I remember those two things. Was that she was kind of separate, so she wasn't in the whole. She didn't get the full freshman experience, and I don't know. I just remember bumping into her sometimes on campus, and it'd be like, you know, these weird kids from our high school. So yeah, it was tough. I also remember, I guess the other thing I remember too, and I don't know if it happened with you, right? But there was like a few hours where you're in complete denial of. I remember the morning it happened. Brianna actually called me, and you know, she said, "Hey, Bethany's dead," and I remember like it actually took me a while. I was like, "Oh, okay, let me just go over to her dorm room and just check up on her." Like, I don't know, you're just a kid, right? You've never dealt with death before, and I remember being in denial on it not actually have happened. So yeah, I don't know. That was what I remember from it. It was a while ago.
Yeah, I remember we would hang at Ray's house, and I think then it was just kind of like, I don't know what else to do. I don't know where else to go. You know, almost like that expectation,
Yeah.
like if you hang there, like things might change and he'll come walking in or something, like, you know.
Yeah, it's almost like a video game where you just, okay, well, I guess let me just restart and I'll get into life. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, waiting for the reset. This is where I need to be.
Yeah.
So when the reset happens, things will go back right back into place, and I'll know right away that, you know, we're starting a new game.
And then that moment never comes, and then it sort of just hits you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a shame, right? Like, you know, we didn't, like, honestly, you and I would have been really great friends in high school. And I don't think
Never talk.
Yeah, right.
Don't feel bad. It happened.
Yeah.
It happened with everybody.
Right. And the irony of it is, I remember Dan Cassidy's father passed away, and I think like the whole school went, right? Like, you know, it was just like you have this whole world of this community at your fingertips, and none of us ever scratched it beyond like the kid sitting next to you in that class.
Yeah, it almost took a tragedy for like you to be able to see, you know, that community that you belong to in a sense of that we're all kind of in this school, in this world together.
Yeah.
So
thanks for bearing that uncomfortable truth.
I mean, that's it. None of us know, and that's what's so interesting about looking back is none of us know how to handle our emotions. You know, I think we all think we're just doing the best we can in reality, but we all think I've got a grip on this, and I definitely think, you know, with so many things, I thought I had a grip on my reality and my life, and then I look back and I go, oh my God, I can't believe like I handled things like this for like 4 years. Like that's clearly denial, or you know, like. And nowadays it's just things I go, I would never allow myself to go down those paths of treating myself like that.
Yeah. Do you have kids?
Nope. I'm still single. I'm still no kids. Yeah.
Same.
You too?
No, I think honestly, I'm in a relationship but no kids or anything.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think it's pretty cool. I hope the effect of the podcast is, you know, for all the kids that went to school listening, is that they'll recognize this and sort of help instill it in their kids, like to, you know, bring over the friend from your class that you don't really talk to over for dinner or something. Or hey, it's okay if you want to do musical, or you don't have to do football, right?
Zack talked about with football the effect that being on a losing team has on you, and that it helps you deal with stuff at like much earlier at an age, and like kind of deal with adversity. Do you see things the same way, or are you like, this sucks?
I'm actually I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm actually still scarred from football because I remember getting picked. We had some shitty human beings for coaches. I remember like me and Javier used to get just picked on ruthlessly by the coaches, like because you know you're watching film. You're a 16, 17-year-old kid, and I remember just like the coaches would just like yell at you, just like bully you. Oh, it was so traumatizing, man. and you can just see like the just oh, it was it's that I actually still think about it sometimes to this day. Like, you know,
Wow.
I'm a 17-year-old kid. You know, you're in. Everybody's watching the film of like the game, and I remember the coach like, "Man, you suck. It's a shame everybody has to like pay for your mistakes." Holy fuck, man! Like you're saying this to like a 16, 17-year-old kid. Like, oh man, yeah. It's I hope that culture has changed, and also like there's such a macho culture too. Like that was right before like kids started dying during like the 2-a-days camps, but we used to just like run sprints until like you'd fall over. You know, there was this drill where you would just they would blow a whistle and you just smash into people. Like, what is that? Yeah,
I was going to say it's like that masculine, like toxic masculinity,
yeah, so
machismo.
toxic. Yeah,
And that's what I mean. I think it's still like that with sports in general, pro sports, college sports, high
yeah,
school sports, and I think even in different parts of the country, worse. You know, the Midwest high school football is probably way tougher. That movie Varsity Blues, right, with James
yeah.
Vanderbeek and John Voight. That's
James Vanderbeek, the
exactly,
balding 35-year-old. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I
as the
don't
high school
want
quarterback.
your life,
Yeah. Oh,
Paul
somebody
Walker.
actually sent me a link. Yeah, somebody. I don't know. Did you have like? Do you remember Tim Miller?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tim Miller, yeah, the coach looked like Howie Long.
Yeah. So apparently, right. So apparently, he's a full-time professional hypnotist now.
Yes, yeah. He travels the
Yeah.
country with his wife,
Yeah. That.
hypnotizing
Sorry.
people.
That's on the spectrum of. Whoa! Didn't see that coming.
Well, Jeff, they never won a game. I mean, at some point, you've got to go for a career change.
Yeah. Yeah.
At some
Yeah.
point, this
Yeah.
is not what you're cut out to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess he figured it out. Yeah. Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah.
So when you graduate in 2.5 years, that's when you decide what is the thing that made you. I mean, you said you didn't really travel much, and then that's when you start backpacking.
So I'd never been outside of the country, right? And then all of a sudden you're a 20-year-old kid, backpack through Europe, through Asia. I mean, it opened up my eyes, man. Yeah, and then turned that into a passion for like building hostels, and I created these great communities where kids from all over the world would, start their new life in like New York or,
What did
LA.
you, what did you see or learn going? That's one of the things like Lizzie talked about with her experience, being in the Dominican Republic and just seeing how other countries live. And Annetta talked about when she would go back to Poland and the things that she knew that she was getting from being at Wissahickon and getting an American education, that she knows that, she was the cool kid when she went back to Poland, that she knew that people there weren't getting in their country. What did you finally stepping out of the country and going around the world and building these, doing all this, like building this business, what did you learn finally, like opening your eyes to the rest of the world? Any differences or?
I mean, where do you start, right? I think the world is so big yet so same at the end of the day, right? So, my life here in Singapore actually isn't that much different than if I was living in Philadelphia, right? You go for a beer with friends. I mean, there are some slight macro differences, obviously, in the way things are run. For example, when I go back to the US, I'm shocked at like the constant CNN mind space that like politics and that kind of stuff has. But at the end of the day, like I think people are people. Like you can always connect with someone. I actually, you know what? Actually, it's a metaphor for this podcast. At the end of the day, no matter how different somebody is to you, there's always something to connect with them on. And I think it's a skill that you have to develop. That somebody who's different from you, you can just listen and find something that you have a common bond on. The problem with us was we didn't get that when we were kids, right?
Yeah.
But it's a powerful skill to have when you get older, and to be able to connect with people that aren't the same. And somewhere, every single person that you ever meet is going to teach you something that you didn't know before, right?
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good lesson to learn.
So,
And then so you at the end of this, you've ended up in Singapore, and what are you working on now?
So I
Well,
work
is
for a
that
company.
the thing that you can't talk about specifically?
No, so yeah, no, so I'm still with them, but I work for a company called McKinsey. So it's like a consulting company, and so I basically work with like Fortune 500 companies on helping start new businesses. And honestly, a lot of it is when you talk to them, it's just this fear and this insecurity of just taking that 0 to 1 step, just like what you're doing now. So what you're doing is actually very powerful, and all these companies with all these resources and money, they just are slightly scared to take that first step. And so I just help them build that new business in whatever country. So
Why did you stay? And I mean, I feel like you've had enough experiences around the world to kind of have a good understanding of what's out there. What made you stay in Singapore versus any of the other countries that you've been in? You mentioned you were in Amsterdam or coming back to the United States. What made you stay out there?
I really love Singapore. I don't know what you've read, but it's beautiful city. It's safe. It's relatively affordable. Plus, you're I think 60 to 70% of the world's population. You're within a 4-hour flight. So whenever things open back up, obviously you're in. If you think about when you're a kid, you can drive from Philadelphia. I don't know what is a 4-hour radius, like upstate New York.
Yeah, Western PA.
Right? Yeah. So it's quite interesting, So I really love living in Southeast Asia. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty comfortable life over here, but obviously I'll always be a Philly kid, right?
Yeah. Do you keep tabs with like the area or with anyone?
Yeah, man. I go through this heartbreak every single year of watching like the Sixers and the Eagles, and I don't know. One of these years, I'm just going to grow out of it. But I don't know. I imagine it's like 10x for you guys being there, but I can't fucking stand it anymore. It's like heartbreaking.
I'm just at that point where I almost, during COVID gave me a great excuse to tune out kind of a lot of TV and a lot of like sports, especially with no crowd. But now that
Yeah.
sports are back, man, like by the time the Sixers were in the playoffs, I was like, I'm not watching. I hadn't really watched any games. And then by the time like second, third game of the first round, I couldn't stay away anymore. And then I just curse myself for letting them, every time you think you're out, they pull you back in. I just curse them for allowing me to like invest my time and life back into them again. And I was so into it. And then, yes, broke my heart. But I spent a couple years like out of the Philly area, up in like New York and stuff. And while not as far away from you, like there's no Philly. It was Mets and Yankees and Knicks territory up there. So like that passion still burned, whether, just as hard, whether I was in Philly or not. So for you, don't discount your passion and the pain that you feel.
The whole Philly sports thing is actually like a really weird phenomenon. Like I don't know, why are we so attached to the Sixers and the Eagles? Like it actually doesn't make any sense, right?
I think we're Philadelphia is a big traditionalist town. Yeah. I think Pennsylvania for a while had the stat of like more people who are born in Pennsylvania stay in Pennsylvania their entire life than any other state in the country. And I think more than anything else, Pennsylvanians and Southeast Pennsylvania specifically passes down this tradition of sports that maybe just kind of sticks.
Maybe it was just a lack of content, right? Like, I'll tell you what, I'd much rather root for Lizzie and Anita and hear about their seasons than the Sixers.
It's something, but that's part of it, right? It's our parents. Our parents grew up. That's all they had was like the sporting events and there's concerts and the way that people like their parents pass around music and this is who we used to see and there's people. That's how almost every old school Philadelphian is with sports. They all have a memory of the Flyers or the Phillies or the Eagles or the Sixers, and our teams have been here for a solid 50 years plus. Whereas a lot of cities have gotten new teams that have come in the last like 30 years or whatever. And it's kind of new to some people, like Memphis, there's no long time stories of the Memphis Grizzlies, from the 70s and the 80s in the NBA. but
Yeah,
people have memories of Dr. J, you know, of the Sixers in the 70s and the 80s that they've been passing, that I grew up with, that you grew up with, that everyone has grown up hearing, whether it was your parents or your friend's dad. That's like, oh, I remember going to the Spectrum or to this arena or to this stadium. And then you get to go there as a kid, and it's like this fairy tale come to life. Oh my God, there it is. That's the thing I watch on TV. That's it.
yeah.
It's, you know, it's and you know, Boston, New York, some of those really packed per capita cities. I think that's very common.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, man. I remember I think also it was influential because it was right around the ascension of Allen Iverson, and that all had a pretty profound effect on us.
Yes, going to the finals our senior year.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I you know, I think it's the one powerful thing that stuck with me ever since I left Philadelphia.
The Sixers in that championship run.
Yeah, and also the scars of
potential championship.
Also, the scars of the toxic masculinity of our football team. Those two things. Those two things.
Don't yell at me about blowing plays, but also Allen Iverson stepping over Tyronn Lue.
Yeah. It's funny. Honestly, it's super cool what you're doing. I hope this keeps going. I hope you keep figuring out what works and doesn't work.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, it's beginning of something big.
Well, this would be the moment then, Jeff, that I go through the yearbook and I check out your actual entry and your picture here, and we see what's what. Yeah,
I don't even know what I look like as can I see what I look like? Holy shit, I was actually a pretty decent looking kid when I was 18, huh?
Yeah, dude. You look pretty much the same, to be honest. Just I don't know.
Yeah.
Just no like the gel, like the crazy spiky jelly, like it's like I kind of combed it, but like not really. I don't really care if it's neat or not.
That's funny.
Kind of like that. So let's see. You've got football 9 through 12, basketball 9 and 10. And then your quote, this is great. Have a little help from my friends, Joe Cocker.
I don't even know. Oh, you know what it was? That was the Wonder Years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're a Wonder Years fan.
Not really. I don't know why I put that in there, right? But actually, it's just I don't know. You don't know what the view. I guess our content creation at that age was not the greatest, right? But it actually, man, do you remember Carrie McCormick?
Yeah.
I remember sitting behind her in class when you're in freshman year, and I think we just one day started talking about the Wonder Years, and it was one of those moments where like we were and we just started talking about it. And after that, I don't think I ever talked to her ever again for the rest of high school.
But that was your thing for that moment.
It was one of those moments. Yeah, that's so weird that you mentioned that. Yeah, that's weird.
That's great. Okay, so this is interesting. Sue's, you'll always be my sweetie pie.
Yeah, which is weird because we never like dated or anything. I just didn't have a date for the prom that year and just took a friend.
So you're talking Susie Mullet.
Yeah. We like that's such a weird thing to write.
And then here we go. This is appropriate. 3 amigos, Hav and Tex. That's Zach, right? Tex is Zach.
Yeah, Zach. Yeah, we used to get in a lot of trouble together.
Yeah, the 3 amigos. You're my boys. To Breeze and the rest. I'll never forget you guys. Who's Breeze?
That's such a rude thing. That's such a Briannon. That's such a rude thing to say. And the rest.
And the rest. Yeah, that's interesting. You know, you call out like you call out like 4 people, and then nothing else. You didn't do like the long trail of initials.
Yeah, that's a horrible post. Jesus. Yeah.
No, I mean, there's some that don't have anything, so
Yeah. Man, that's so weird, huh?
Yeah. Well, Jeff, thank you. This has been awesome,
honestly,
dude.
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, if there's ever anything I do, happy to help out, dude.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely going to email you and maybe drop some questions that I'm kind of struggling with just process and figuring out what's the smart way to go about this.
Honestly, if you want to figure out how to scale or how to platform it or just how to figure out a specific, honestly, I'm happy to help.
Awesome. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I got to make up for the lost time on me. Honestly, I don't even think did we even say a single word to each other in high school?
I don't have any. I mean, I remember you just being there, and then like I remember that you knowing that you went to Penn State, and after that, never had another interaction with you, or never like really heard anyone say like, oh, you know who I ran into, Jeff Pan, and he's doing this, or never anything like that.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Honestly,
no, thank you. You know, that's the cool thing is like when someone like when you vibe with someone so well that you had zero connection with, and then you do go, fuck, why weren't we friends in high school?
Yeah. You know how you always watch those like teen or college movies, and somehow they have like a radio DJ. I don't know in what school that exists, but that would have been you, right?
Yeah. I always wish that we had that gig where I could have done like the morning announcements radio show where I play like music for 30 minutes and Mr. Madden wants everybody to know.